Hello strategy gaming enthusiasts, my name is AlzaboHD. Victoria 3 just received the biggest update in its entire history, and in today's challenge video, I will Greek out by attempting to restore Rome using the power of IMF treaties. That's right, we're talking Greece, Byzantium, and bailouts, and with the new Charters of Commerce DLC, we'll weaponize debt treaties and deficit spending to bring our people Rome. This video is sponsored by Paradox Interactive, and the COC DLC is available to play today. V3 will also be free to play on Steam from June the 19th to the 23rd, so let's hop into Iron Man mode and explore how to transform this bankrupt barony into the richest debtmocracy of the 20th century. Greece begins their campaign in 1826 as a relatively impoverished and backwater minor power, with a meager military, tiny GDP, population under 1 million, and worst of all, ruled by a German. We start with two provinces, surprisingly democratic laws, and obligations to Britain, Russia, and France, with a Turkish truce set to last only 12 months. Our first order of business will be to boost our prestige by reviving the Olympic Games and researching up to and including the required organized sports technology. For a Western state, Greece starts off with comparatively primitive technology and lacks most Era 1 advancements, including line infantry. No one said this will be easy, so we'll go ahead and rival the Ottoman Empire and Montenegro while increasing relations with the Ionian Islands, as we can annex them via decision later on. The new Charters of Commerce DLC adds treaties as a new mechanic, and we'll use this to our advantage by negotiating a defensive pact and independence guarantee with Russia, while granting them nothing but a commitment towards censoring the Greek media. Our economy is functionally non-existent, so we'll queue up a construction sector and the bare necessities. The current Greek government is a blight to our democratic legacy, but before we can swap to representative rule, we'll have to pass other laws first, starting with the National Guard. In Duxa, let's get started and improve our relations with Britain and France, and before long, we have a National Guard which will boost our military capabilities. We'll need more votes to kick out that one proud Bavarian, and disastrously, the Russians called in their obligation at the worst possible time. We're forced to join their power block, which is like the Hotel Katushka Fornia, in that you can check in anytime you want, but you can never leave. Unlike our new overlord, we now have the right to vote and a growing population, and when news reached Athens that the Turks were at war with Egypt, it was time to set a course for Constantinople. We'll engage the Ottomans to return our land and call in Russia with an obligation. The Turks are terrified, so unfortunately we'll have to set our demands for Lower Macedonia and Cyprus as primary in case they back down, leaving us little room to negotiate for more land. This sick man of Europe opted for war instead of diplomacy, so in 1841 we've begun our first campaign to reclaim our rightful Roman realm. The original plan was to liberate Constantinople via fleet, and this was a failure as the Ottomans blockaded the Bosphorus. Instead, we'll be forced to push the front by land and set our strategic objective on the Sublime Port. Given that the Turks were being eaten by Egyptians, our Russo-Hellenic coalition took the capital in under 5 months, and the war was already over before it had even started. A token resistance in Serbia was slaughtered by our Russian comrades, and poets prestigiously rhymed upon the ruin of Rome. In less than 9 months, we've won the war, tripled our population, and have recovered Cyprus and Macedonia. It's 1842, and our position has substantially improved. We have a 4-year truce with the Turks, which gives us time to prepare for what lies ahead, like researching ranked racism and expanding the fleet. This just wouldn't be a Greece campaign without debt and deficit spending. Life imitates art, and will do anything for a bailout, like letting Russians open an embassy with the Treaty of Constantinople. Balancing a budget has never been this easy, and Albanians advocated for their own segregation, while a toilet paper shortage had struck our nation. While we might have segregation, a German still leads our nation, and Greece needs more than charity to be free of this Teutonic tyranny. Turk talk, it's almost time for second breakfast, and once nationalism is unlocked, Greece will get claims across our former homeland.
You've got mail.
Oh god, it's Anatolia Online, and they're demanding Macedonia. Naturally, we will not be subjected to criminal abuse, and our treaty with Russia means that they are contractually obligated to come to our defense. Nationalism could not have come at a better time, as this grants us the Ionian Islands for free, along with claims over Thrace, the Aegean Islands, and Crete. The Qin dynasty has also heeded our call, and Turkey was terrified of the impending Thanksgiving, where we've demanded everything up to and including the capital of Constantine. From womb to tomb, we are bound by others past and present, and while the empire is striking back, we are far too hoth to handle. Austria and Russia hold our line while we dive into Adana using our fleet, but a surprise incursion by the teleporting Turkish army have sent us homeward to thank again. Our coalition of Christian countries outnumbers the infidel 3-1, and in 1848, Constantinople fell to our forces for the second and final time. Vengeance for 1453 was at hand, and this flightless bird was about to be converted into chicken nuggets. The Ottoman era is at an end, and Greece is great again with the recovery of Second Rome, Thrace, and most importantly, the Island Boys. We have the population of Slovakia, and we're ready for more welfare, which will demand from France in exchange for foreign investment and an embassy. 10,000 ducats from treaties alone is going Rome, but this is only the beginning. The Hagia Sophia is hiring, and Greece is a major power on account of our dastardly drip and prestigious trade goods. With wealth voting, we are now a proto-democracy, and a landlord conspiracy has resulted in a coup which was averted. Once Thrace is cored, we can move our capital from Athens to Constantinople, and since Egypt and the Ottomans are at war, it's a prime time to play for Crete. Our war goals will be for the island and Anatolian Adana, along with stewardship of the subject state that controls Mecca. Greece has overwhelming maritime superiority and will make proverbial gravy out of Egypt's navy before landing and securing the island. Next up is the Nile, but the Baltic boys are already there and captured Cairo for the greater good. Constantinople actually almost fell while we were busy sourcing art for our museums, but a detachment dispatched them in the nick of time and yielded us our war goals, plus our first subject state, indirectly making Greece the custodian of the holiest site of the Islamic faith. Industry and capitalists were by now a growing influence in Greek society, and the polity's production proceeded parabolically. Only the invisible hand is welcome in these lands, and that hand demands the Treaty of the Second and Third Romes, formalizing our Russian alliance. Of course, we still can't leave their power block until we lower their economic leverage, but in spite of this misfortune, we are in a better position than the Ottomans, who are about to get gobbled for their bidecadal harvest festival. Everything was great until St. Petersburg passed market unification II, which forced Greece into the Russian market, also known as the economic equivalent of Dante's Inferno. The Turks have fear in their eyes, and that's because we're demanding their capital, Bulgaria, and the rest of Adana, but nevertheless, they didn't back down, and that's in spite of France already occupying half of Anatolia. Looking back, it was quite redundant to involve Russia, as we can solo Big Bird by ourselves, and an internal revolution was a more relevant threat to our state. These positivist protesters demanded a more representative republic with no kings, especially German, and will heed their call by attempting a presidential putsch. It's 1855, the war is over, and we're practically contiguous, but this South German stain still wears the purple of our ancestors, and much like the ancient Greeks, it was time to replace tyranny with democracy. Perhaps unsurprisingly, German collaborationists attempted to halt Hellenic liberty, and when their leader mysteriously self-eated, threw the country into civil war. Austria supported the monarchy and became our direct enemy, and we lost control of Constantinople before taking back occupation with a naval invasion. The writing was on the wall, and the blood of the rebels watered the tree of liberty, but the damage to our economy was dire, and democracy isn't edible. Olympic game prestige will distract the starving masses, and the aptly named Treaty of Pay Greek Debt meant that Britain bailed us out yet again. For maximum roleplay potential, we'll also sign a contract for French funds and a Prussian agreement for debt consolidation. Our people, still within the Ottoman Empire, revolted in open revolution, and while a truce prevented us from supporting them directly, we were printing diplomatic money, made all the more funny by milking Qing China of tugboat tribute. The rebels in Turkey had won, and there were now two Greeces, and while it would have been humorous to make Greece vassalize Greece and have double debt dominions, we'll take the land for free and annex their country. Democracy now meant that our foreign king received a cervical haircut, and an incompetent Greek capitalist became our first elected president. We'll need Albania to reform Rome as Byzantium, and the notorious GRE sought this sacred land along with Konya, Kastamonu, and the liberation of Bosnia and Iraq. By this point in time, Turking Out The Trash had become a time-honored tradition, and there was no need to involve any of our allies. Ottoman hegemony died not with a dramatic battle, but with a whimper, and the once mighty monarchy had fallen and couldn't get up. We'll lend a hand by taking all of their land and uniting our nation across the strait, but this victory meant that Greece now had a Sunni Turkish plurality. Irony isn't dead either, as while we might have the land, forming Byzantium requires a monarchy. The day that free trade passed the Senate was the day the Senate proposed its own dissolution, and despite an optimistic opposition, the Kingdom of Greece was re-established in 1863. At long last, we can revive the Eastern Roman Empire, and this national unifier grants Byzantium claims across the continent. The B-boys are back in town, but we want the Roman Republic, so it's time to reverse our regime back into liberty. After years of demanding market access and damaging relations with Russia, we'll expel their diplomats to lower the leverage of their power bloc, permitting us to leave Ruski Mir in 1864. We're the 6th greatest major power and deserve a power bloc of our own, complete with a banging statue, and the sovereign empire of the SPQR Debtmocracy was to be founded on the principles of vassalization, exploitation, and debt consolidation. Promising child labor allows us to form an alliance with Britain, but our power bloc is almost empty, and who better to join than the swashbucklers of Somalia? This powerful and prosperous economy was to be the 3rd member of our DK crew, and once our Turkish truce expired, Byzantium set her sights on reclaiming Bulgaria. Democracy had returned. The Turks and their Austrian allies hydrated our vegetation, and in the space of 5 years our purple polity proliferated profoundly. Independent Albania still existed, but they too would join their Balkan brothers in Byzantium. All well-rounded debtmocracies need rubber and resources, and in 1871, Gaza received a protection package complete with a fleet of imperial activists. Naturally, they sought to free Palpatine from Egyptian domination, and while fear is the mind killer, I have the impression none of these powers ever back down. It's Rome and Britain versus Egypt and Russia, but a more accurate account would be to say the British Museum versus the Fremen. Germans migrated en masse into our borders, while those of Egypt would soon be redrawn, liberating Lebanon and Palpatine, while giving Rome direct control over Aleppo. The troublesome Turks were at last dealt with in the War of 1876, where our Canadian allies occupied Alaska on our behalf. The Otto-Russo alliance was shattered in the Battle of Diyarbakir, and in less than a year, we had obtained our final ambitions in Anatolia. It doesn't take a Ferengi to lay out a treaty of acquisition, and Iraq was in our sights, but with the war in Russia over, we could see them from our backyard. The final frontier is Roman and no longer Russian, but when you need to rush in a tight deadline, the only logical choice is a montage. We'll welcome Jabal Shammar, Rome, as our newest protectorate, make macarons out of Macron, and invoke the spirit of Freddie Mercury by liberating Zanzibar into the democratic domain. Our truces with Lebanon and Palestine are expiring, so we'll launch a war to protect Beirut, which was taken in less than a month, steel ourselves with frames to double our production capacity, and threaten Indonesia into a protectorate to ensure the flow of spice and fiat currency. This is an early beta build of patch 1.9, and sometimes the simulation breaks down, in this case preventing us from liberating the Maldives as our boats refuse to land, forcing our plan into a white peace. Thankfully, we can now subjugate our Iraqi power bloc member, but our economy was screaming for another bailout. For the price of a few fish, London absorbed our debt entirely, and the Rump Ottoman reservation backed down into Rome's newest subject state. Royal purple had by now propagated across the land, but we're only getting started. Nejd was next, and bit the knee. Palestine was free under new management, and Congo lent a hand by respecting our authority, but our southern sovereign neighbor remained yet outside of the fold. We must liberate Syria and Sudan from these Mamelukian lands, and while the Levant fell swiftly and seriously, the rest of Egypt soldiered on into a stalemate. Our naval invasion of Sudan became bogged down by the sands of time, and attempts to land in Cairo were met with failure after failure. The Roman Senate was desperate to resolve this disastrous miscalculation and decreed the mass conscription of thousands of Turks to throw into the meat grinder, and with over 100,000 soldiers now marching towards Cairo, the enemy could only watch in terror as their pyramids were plundered. It took over 7 years of walking like an Egyptian to liberate Sudan and Syria, and with the help of another British bailout, Second Rome turned her attention on Third Rome that lied to the north. Our goal here would be to reappropriate the puppets of Finland and Baltica and free our boys in blue, but Prussia sided with Russia, which would hamper our advances into yet another campaign of attrition. Pro-Roman Germans flocked to our banners and deserted their Prussian masters, and while not related, Armenia had somehow become animist and African due to mass immigration. The only way to win this war was through Siberian intervention, and this gambit succeeded and split Prussia and Russian attention across 4 fronts. Germany had left the building, along with our ambitions to create a multicultural society, but at least we could now rush be in peace. Back at home, Albania became the first place to procure oil, and everyone near and far scander-begged to live in the most prosperous province of Byzantium. Somehow, we've surpassed 100 million GDP, with an economy of stagnation and debt consolidation, and the nation of Rossiya was ready to throw in the white towel. Unfortunately, our forces never held Helsinki directly, so peace gave us only Baltica and freed Ukraine. But all the same, Germany now lay in ruin under communist and anarchist revolutions. As our nation is nearing the 20th century, Oman and the Ibadis welcomed Greek protection, while Syria and the once formidable Egypt accepted vassalation without any bloodshed. It's the dawn of a new millennium, and like all mornings, it's time to grab some coffee and have some funge. Of course, Funge sometimes backs down and will welcome the newest member of Debtmocracy, as Byzantium now controls half of North and Eastern Africa. With electricity unlocked, it's time to modernize our empire with substations and build the world's first skyscraper in Constantinople, erected 2 years later in 1903. Capitalism and Debtmocracy is about exploitation, so they'll lift their bootstraps while we eradicate communist separatists in our Baltic puppet government. For the first time in history, Rome has the second highest global GDP, slightly behind that of America, and in the face of a positivist revolution, the Roman Senate passed universal suffrage and granted all men the right to vote. Liberté, égalité, and fraternité would win the day, but my lack of experience with the new trade center mechanic meant that we were leaving money on the figurative table. Creating these centers means that Byzantine goods can now be more efficiently exported, catapulting our GDP from 180 to 190 to finally 200 million GDP, and this is as good a place as any to pause and Greek out to an overview of the world. By 1906 AD, Byzantium controls all of their historical CK3 territory, along with sovereignty over a power bloc that rules almost all of the Middle East, Eastern Africa, the Congo, Malaysia, and the entirety of Alaska. The SPQR Debtmocracy is the third most powerful faction in geopolitics. Byzantium is the fourth greatest world power and is itself the largest export economy, while importing very little on account of autarky. Our GDP is the second largest at 210 million, slightly behind that of the United States, and we lead global production in engines, porcelain, ship and steel manufacturing, glass, fish, lumber, and iron. So great is our production that we also lead in the 3 prestige goods of refined steel, precision tools, and select fish. Our population of over 40 million Romans and a capital of 5 million has a Turkish majority and sizable communities of Greeks and Albanians, while religiously 3/4 are Orthodox with smaller Sunni, Catholic, Protestant, and animist congregations. In diplomatic terms, the world is more or less like our own, except there's an independent Texas and pasta polity in Ecuador. Much like Marx intended, Germany in this timeline is the birthplace of communism, and what could be more funny than a feminist Hamburgian market ruled by a man? Of course, there's also Mega Mexico, an Italy almost unified by Sardinia, and Canadian colonies in Africa, which only adds upon our lore. Rome is ruled by a Greek president of humanitarian ideology, and her laws are democratic, non-secular, and quite progressive for the early 20th century. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank Paradox Interactive for sponsoring today's video. The Charters of Commerce DLC is available today, and Victoria 3 itself is playable for free from June the 19th to the 23rd. Let me know in the comments below what you'd like to see on AlzaboHD, and you can support me for free by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. If you'd like to make further treaties, consider becoming a channel member or supporting me on Patreon, and without further ado, here's a shout out to those that do.